Welcome to The Last Empire, Ancient Mysteries Reveal the Future. We're going to take a fascinating journey to a number of lost civilizations in this series. And we're going to discover some amazing things from the past that show us what the future holds. Let's begin this first program with Secrets of the Lost Scrolls, Buried Myths and Legends. You know, many people today are concerned about what is taking place in the world today. You think about it. Much upheaval has taken place in the Middle East in just recent years. I take tours to the Middle East each year, and I notice that in some countries you can't go there anymore because of the upheaval in the Middle East. Then, of course, there are earthquakes. Just last year, I was running this series of programs in the city of Christchurch. What a tragic city that is in terms of the fact that its heart has been ripped out, and an amazing, resilient people living in the city of Christchurch. But people are concerned, scientists are worried about these things. And then, of course, we have tsunamis. You know, I also travel to the islands of the Pacific nations. And just early this year, I was out in the Cook Islands, and I noticed around the island there were signs marking the escape routes in case there was a tsunami. In fact, I was even in Kiribati just this year too, and I noticed that they took me to the highest mountain in the Kiribati Islands, 3 meters above sea level. You sure wouldn't want to be there when a tsunami struck. But these things concern many people today. And then, of course, there's climate change and global warming ticking away in the background silently, but having an effect on our environment and our lifestyles as time goes on. Of course, there's international conflicts. And in fact, in many places around the world, there are international conflicts that are taking place. In fact, someone estimated somewhere around about 20 to 30 international conflicts every year for the last decade, they once said. And then, of course, we have the fragile global economic situation. Nations are borrowing money by the billions of dollars. And economists know that we're living in a house of cards. And because of these things, people are asking a very serious question. What does the future hold? You know, you think of that word predictions or prophecies. You go home or while you're at home, you type that word in, prophecy. I did it a number of times, and I noticed on one occasion 37 million hits. You see, because people want to know, what does the future hold? In fact, you know, you think of the column centimetres in our newspapers and tabloid magazines for the psychics. The column centimetres have been growing over the years because people want to know, what does the future hold? You know, I was down here in India, in Benares, on the mighty Ganges River just a few years ago. And this is a sacred place to the Hindu people. They come to take a sacred bath in the Ganges River. And I noticed right here in this place, someone had set up their astrology shop, because people down there also want to know, what does the future hold? This is a very important question that is around many places in the world today. I was in Bangkok, and I noticed someone had set up their palm reading little stand, because people want to know, what does my future hold? What is going to take place in the future? Now, you remember just a couple of years ago, 2012, the world was supposed to end in December 2012 because of the Mayan calendar and the end of the world and all those predictions that were being made. But actually, what happened in 2012? Well, nothing happened. You see, my point is, it's very hard to tell the future. It's not easy. Many people were doing it, but actually nothing happened. Some of you will remember well the year 2000, when many different predictions were made about what was going to take place in the world at that time. But again, what happened? Well, nothing happened. We're still here. The point is, it's not easy to predict the future. Not easy at all. In fact, These Times magazine, some years ago, ran an interesting article. They surveyed some of the predictions of the psychics. They noticed that 6 out of 250 predictions were actually correct. That's just 3%. You could guess at it, and do just as good when you stop and think about it. Now, my point is this: it's not easy to predict the future. In fact, they also noticed that the average leading psychic's accuracy, his batting average, or their batting average, is about 16%. In other words, for every 100 predictions that are made by the leading psychics, only 16 are correct. Again, it's not easy to predict the future. Well, that leads us to an important question. Can we actually know the future? Is it possible to predict the future? Well, there are two essentials that you would need if you want a source that is reliable for knowing the future. Number one, you would need something that has historical accuracy. In other words, we're not dealing with myths and legends. So something that has substance under our feet. That's the first thing you'd want. Second thing is you would want a source that has a proven track record of dependable predictions. In other words, do the predictions actually happen? Again and again, they're fulfilled. For example, if I said to you, look, tomorrow, the stock price, the prices for the shares of Qantas are going to go through the roof by lunchtime tomorrow. And so sell everything you have in the morning and buy Qantas shares as soon as you can before lunchtime, because they're going to go through the roof. You're not going to go and sell everything you have to buy Qantas shares first thing in the morning unless you know a little bit about, number one, me. Do I have a track record in the stock market of proven predictions? Have the predictions that I've made actually come to pass? You're also going to want to do a bit of study when it comes to the trends of the shares of Qantas. Otherwise, you might be buying something which is going to send you to the wall. And so you see, we need a proven track record when we are looking at a source for telling the future. Now, is there such a source? Well, absolutely there is. And in this series of programs, and especially in this program, I'm going to give you the evidence of a source whose predictions are dependable and reliable. Well, as we go through this program and the ones to come, we're going to be using two things side by side so that we can see a dependable source for knowing the future. We're going to be looking at ancient history, the historical records, and we're going to be having a look at what the archaeologists have discovered. What has been found as the archaeologists dig up the sands. Let's first of all talk a little bit about what archaeology is. Now, in archaeology, we simply dig up the past, if we can put it that way. You see, in the ancient world, people tended to build on little hills generally. I mean, obviously, this is a better place to be able to defend oneself from when you're on the top of a hill. Of course, you're above the floodplain. Now, so we have a village on top of a hill, and let's say an earthquake strikes the city or the village. The city will be destroyed and the people will have to flee perhaps, but when they come back, they will not bring in the bulldozer for obvious reasons. What they will do is they will just bring in some fill up to the lowest point they can possibly have as base, bring in the fill, and then build on top. Now let's say 100 or 200 years go by and an army comes through and attacks that city. And it destroys much of it in a fire and so on. Much of it's going to be destroyed, and that when the people come back again, they'll bring in more fill and build on top of that. And so the hill is growing over time, as you can appreciate. So when an archaeologist digs, he's digging up time. The deeper he goes, or the deeper they go, the older that civilization is. In fact, if you go to the Middle East today, to say Jerusalem, you can visit the city of Jerusalem, and when you're walking on the streets of Jerusalem today, you will notice that you are about 6 or 7 meters above the level 2,000 years ago. In fact, you can walk down some steps to the level of about 20 feet or 6 or 7 meters, and you'll be down at 2000 BC, 2,000 years ago, I should say. So the civilization mound has grown over time. We call this a tell, as you can see on the screen, a T-E-L. Here's an example of a tell. This is Tel Megiddo in Israel today. There's quite a number of civilizations built one on top of the other here. In fact, you can see in this picture on the right bottom corner, there's an area where the archaeologists have been digging, and then just above it, where those green lights are, there's another level of that civilization, of another civilization built on top. So archaeologists are digging up time. Now, they find many things, of course, when they dig. They don't usually find something like this little cylinder here. This is called the Nabonidus cylinder, a king who's mentioned in ancient records. They don't usually find something like this, but they do find lots of broken pottery. And pottery is very important to the archaeologists because it helps them to date where they are as they're digging down. Now, let me illustrate it this way. Just as dress styles change through time, and if we have a lady who may be a dress expert here today, she can look at just the back of a dress and tell you, oh, that's a 70s dress, or that's from the 1700s, that particular dress. Or perhaps it's a guy who's an expert on cars. He doesn't need to see the whole car. Sometimes all he needs to see is the back bumper bar, and he can say, that's from the 50s, or that's from the 40s. And so, because car styles and dress styles change through time, we can use those things to date. Now, when it comes to archaeologists, because pottery styles also changed through time, so too we can use pottery to date where we are as we're digging down. So a pottery expert, all he needs is the top of the rim of a cup or some sort of a vessel, or even the bottom, just the top or the bottom, just a piece of that, and he can tell you, oh, we're at 700 BC, and he'll only be within about 50 years out. So this is how archaeologists date where they are as they're digging. Now, let's talk for a moment about archaeologists' most important discoveries, and there have been a number of them, but these are the three most important. Let's come, first of all, to that magnificent land of the Nile. We want to go to Egypt right now, and many people have been traveling to Egypt for centuries. There are some amazingly awesome monuments in Egypt that one can see, like the Colossi of Memnon in Luxor, or the beautiful mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut at Dur el-Bahri, also in Luxor. And then, of course, there are the mighty pyramids. In fact, that's what most people think about when they think about the land of Egypt. Now, I want you to think for a moment about these great pyramids, which are the burial places for just one man, usually. Now, this is Khufu's pyramid, or Cheops pyramid. It's about 150 meters high. It's really like a mountain of stone when you think about it. In fact, there's about 2 million stones, it's estimated, in this one pyramid of this great king of Egypt. In fact, if you cut the stones from this one pyramid into 30 centimetre cubes, so here we have 30 centimetre cubes of the stone of that pyramid's cut up like that, and you put them end on end, they will go around Australia more than twice from just one pyramid. That's how huge this thing is. In fact, I want you to think, if this thing was hollow, this is the volume of this one pyramid. By the way, you will notice at the top of this pyramid here that there was once white Tura limestone that covered the whole of the outside of the pyramid. Now, these are the buildings you could fit inside this one pyramid if it was empty. You could fit in the magnificent Muhammad Ali Mosque from Cairo, and alongside it, you could also fit in the Notre Dame Cathedral from Paris. Then there'd also be room for St. Peter's of London, of Rome, I should say, and St. Paul's of London. These buildings would also fit inside this amazing pyramid. Added to that, we could fit in the Colosseum from Rome as well, which is a magnificent building, a huge volume. So all these buildings could fit in the one pyramid at the same time. That's how vast this structure is. Now, the pyramids, as we said, were just a mountain of stone. But it's in Egypt that we find the most important discovery, or one of the most important discoveries. It was in 1798 that Napoleon Bonaparte, the great French leader, came here to Egypt in 1798 to a place called Rosetta in the Delta. And while his soldiers were digging in the Delta region, they came across this interesting stone here, known today as the Rosetta Stone. Now you will notice this stone is in three sections. The top section of this stone is what we call Egyptian hieroglyphic writings. Then the second section is in the cursive Egyptian script called the Demotic script. And finally, the bottom section is the Greek language. Now, they guessed rightly that this was an inscription in three different languages. And these languages were telling the same story. Now, they knew the Greek language, so they could work from the known language to the unknown language at the top, the Egyptian hieroglyphics. Now, it took them about 20 years, thanks to a brilliant Frenchman by the name of Jean-Francois Champollion mainly. And Champollion worked on this thing for 20 or so years, and finally he was able to announce to the world that he could read the Egyptian hieroglyphic writings. Now, what was the significance of this? Well, the significance was this. You see, written all over the tombs and the temple walls in Egypt was this hieroglyphic language, but no one knew what it meant. But now they could read the writing, and they could learn about the Egyptian religion, the Egyptian history, the Egyptian culture. And so as they did this, they were able to unlock ancient Egypt and all that went with it. So you can see this was a very important discovery indeed. The second discovery, we must travel to Iran now. When we go to Iran, we come to a fascinating place known as Behistun. And Behistun, there is a huge cliff, and high on the cliffs, a number of inscriptions have been made. One of these, called the Behistun inscription, has a very interesting inscription on it in three languages again. This was put here by Darius the Great, a great Medo-Persian king who had this inscription made. And because they knew one of the languages, they were able to work from the known language again, just like with the Rosetta Stone, from the known language to the unknown, and now they were able to decipher what we call the cuneiform script, which is the script that was used in Mesopotamia. That whole region, the Sumerians were there, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and many of the nations in the cradle of civilization there in Mesopotamia, or what we call Iraq today, this was their language. In fact, it's this little cylinder here that I have that's actually written in the cuneiform script. And so this was the language of the Mesopotamian peoples, the written language. But no one knew what all that writing meant until the Behistun inscription. And thanks to a British man by the name of Henry Rawlinson, a British soldier who saw this inscription and one or two others in Mesopotamia, he was able to decipher this great language or written language of these ancient people in the center of the then known world. So as a result of that discovery, we are now able to read all these cuneiform tablets. These tablets, of course, are just clay, pieces of clay, and they were wet and they wrote in them and then dried them in the sun or baked them. So we have whole libraries of these cuneiform tablets, some 20,000 volumes in one library alone. And now the archaeologists and the historians were able to unlock the culture, the religion, and the history of the people of the Mesopotamian region. So again, a very important discovery was made there in Iran. The last of the three most important discoveries was found at the Dead Sea in Israel. At a place called Qumran on the northwestern edge of the Dead Sea, a young Bedouin boy, so the story goes, was minding his clan's goats with one of his friends when one of the goats that they were minding strayed up into the area of some cliffs. Now the boys, in an endeavour to get the goat back, threw a stone at the goat. They missed, and the stone went into one of the caves, and there are many caves in this region, and when it went into the cave, they heard the sound of breaking pots. These boys, of course, thought, there's treasure up there, so they raced up to those caves, but to their dismay, all that they found in that cave were some old pots, and in those pots, some very old scrolls. And no doubt these boys were disappointed, but the Bedouin clan that they belonged to, they took these scrolls up, took them to Bethlehem, where they sold them to an antiquities dealer by the name of Kando in Bethlehem. And he purchased them for $100 US, would you believe? Now, of course, just a few years after that, those same scrolls, just like that, were selling for $500,000 US. That's inflation, of course. Wouldn't mind being on the end of that, would we? But of course, today, those same scrolls are priceless. You just wouldn't be able to purchase them today. This collection of scrolls, of course, is known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. The question is, why are they so valuable? What's the significance of these old scrolls that they are worth so much today? Well, there are a number of reasons. First of all, these things are very old, and of course anything that's old seems to be valuable. We value old things. Now, these scrolls were dated by a number of means. First of all, the style of the script. You see, just as pottery styles change through time, just as that changed, so did the style of the script change through time. For example, if you read English, you try reading English of the 16th century. It's a lot harder, a lot different than it is today. The S's are F's and so on. Not easy because script styles change through time. Well, the ancient people, their scripts changed as well. So the style of the script showed how old it was. They did radiocarbon dating on some of these scrolls as well. And the radiocarbon dating, of course, helped them to date the scrolls to actually the same time. And finally, they even discovered some old coins with some of these scrolls. And so those three things helped them to date these things. And they were dated to 100 to 200 BC, 100 to 200 years before the time of Christ. So they were very old scrolls, as you can appreciate. Well, what were these scrolls? Well, they consisted of a number of things. First of all, they consisted of documents that outlined the rules of the community who wrote these scrolls. They were a group of Jewish monastics living there at the Dead Sea. They're the rules of how they lived and so on. But 1/3 of these documents actually were some of every book of what we call the Old Testament part of the Bible, except the book of Esther and the book of Nehemiah. So the Old Bible, that was there, the Old Testament part. In fact, it's this part that contains the ancient predictions that have a proven track record that we're going to see during this series. The predictions are contained in these Dead Sea Scrolls. The third thing about these scrolls was that the old biblical records, or the Bible that we have, you may see in a motel or you have at home somewhere, it hasn't changed through the centuries. You see, scholars thought this. They thought that surely if someone copies the original document and then someone copies the copy of the original and then someone copies the copy of that and so on down through time, that surely you're going to introduce a whole heap of mistakes. That was the theory, you see. Well, they had a way of checking this now, because up to this point in time, the oldest documents they had were about 900 AD, 1,000 years later, of the Old Testament. You see, it's like this. You've played the game of Chinese whispers, as I have as a little kid. You whisper something in someone's ear and you pass it around the room, you know what happens. By the time we get to the last person and they whisper it back to me, you know that the thing has changed significantly from how it began. And so that's what they thought. Surely, as we copy and copy and copy down through the centuries, we'll introduce significant mistakes. But when they did this, when they compared the oldest that they had now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, with the oldest up to before that point, they found that for all intents and purposes, the biblical records haven't changed. In fact, the Bible that you pick up in a motel or that you have in your home, it is essentially the same as what we have way back then. And we know now why this is the case, because the scribes, the Jewish scribes, were very particular in the way they copied their manuscripts. For example, they would do word counts on these documents and count up the words. And if they found that the words didn't tally right, they would sometimes screw the whole thing up and start again. Now, you imagine, would you, if you get to the last paragraph in a book, one of the scrolls was 9 meters long. Imagine you get to the last paragraph and you make a mistake. Start all over again. Well, you can see the point. They were very particular, and this is why mistakes were not introduced. All right, now let's go back now, having seen what archaeologists do and the most important discoveries which help us unlock the past, so to speak. Let me give you the evidence for the historical accuracy of these writings, because this is the first thing we need if we want to have a document that we can depend on for understanding the future. Now, I'm going to begin by looking at one of the greatest archaeologists of our age, W.F. Albright. Who was W.F. Albright? Well, as I said, one of the greatest archaeologists of our age. He was the author of over 800 works on archaeology and related topics. And not only that, but he was the director of the American School of Oriental Research. So, in other words, he's no fool. He knows his business. Now, this is what W.F. Albright says about the biblical records, and then I'm going to give you the evidence as to why he says this. He said, "In the center of history stands the Bible. Thanks to modern research, that's archaeological studies, we can now recognize its substantial historicity, its historical accuracy. To sum it up," he says, "we can now treat the Bible from beginning to end as an authentic document of religious history." In other words, it's not fairy tales, myths and legends, he says. Now let's have a look at why he says that by going to some ancient civilizations together. As we look at some of the amazing discoveries in lost civilizations, we're going to go to the great civilizations in Petra, the Hittite peoples, and we're going to go to the terrorists of the ancient world as well. But let's begin with Petra. Some of you have no doubt been to Petra, or certainly seen pictures and programs on Petra, a city carved out of rock. Now, Petra is located just south of the Dead Sea and just north of the Gulf of Aqaba, as you can see on that map there with the arrows pointing there. Now, it was in 1812 that a Swiss explorer by the name of Johann Ludwig Burckhardt was about to take a journey from Damascus in Syria down to Cairo in Egypt. Now, Burckhardt was believed to have converted to the Islamic faith, and he was certainly very fluent with the Muslim culture, and he understood Arabic writing and so on. He's on his way to Cairo, and he's got a guide with him who's going to take him there. As the guide and Burckhardt travelled along, the guide started to tell Burckhardt about an amazing place carved out of rock, and Burckhardt immediately recognized this as the place that had vanished for over 900 years. Nobody knew where this place was. The last they'd heard of it was around about the time of the Crusaders, some 800 years before. And his ears pricked up, and his curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to visit this place. Now, the guide showed him, or told him as they journeyed, that this place was near